Heat fans are on the brink after another quiet day in NBA free agency. The Donovan Mitchell dream is dead. Miami hasn't improved the roster. Is there any hope for the team at all? And who, if anyone, is to blame? We break it all down in today's State of the Heat address on this live episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Heat Live, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day, Monday to Friday. I'm Wes Goldberg. I'm editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil, both of us credentialed Heat media members. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Thanks to everybody tuning in live here at 5 o'clock Tuesday after day 3 of free agency. We'll talk about the Heat front office's dated strategy with how they approach this off seasons and the possibility of adding DeMar DeRozan in a second. But first, I want to start with Donovan Mitchell, who signed a 3-year max extension with the Cavaliers this morning. We got on here and wondered what the holdup was yesterday, David. And then within hours, they get a deal done. Then Donovan Mitchell goes on Instagram and says that staying in Cleveland was always what he wanted to do. Are you buying that? And if so, do you think the Heat ever believed that they had a chance to get him?
I am buying it. I think, and I speculated yesterday. I don't know exactly what Donovan's intentions are, what his motivations are. I think he wants his bag, and he got it. So if in that sense, it was important for him to secure it. So yeah, I think the opportunity to win and get paid a whole heck of a lot of money is probably what he was seeking. I think there were opportunities for him to go to a better market, B, a better team, and to C, play alongside somebody that he's close with, like Bam Adebayo or somebody along those lines. But in order to secure the bag and still continue to play and win at a high level, Cleveland is as good as option as any. And I'm not knocking the Cavs. Like, they're a good team. He's got the opportunity there. I don't put them as a title contender. I think you and I both agree on that note, that as good as they might be, I don't know that they're a title contender just yet. Maybe there's another move to be made. But regardless of that, I think the Heat certainly thought there was a possibility of getting Donovan Mitchell. I think, they had to ask around. They had to look at it as a possibility. And that was within context that the kind of superstar that was frustrated and perhaps looking to make a move that Miami has historically capitalized on since Pat Riley's tenure in 1995. So I think absolutely they thought there was a possibility. It was always, however, a slim one. And I don't think, I think you and I both were pretty solidly in agreement about that was a pipe dream at best. Never felt as close to securing Donovan as it was last year in their pursuit of Damian Lillard. That was far further along and far more likely a possibility because of Lillard's age, because of Lillard specifically requesting Miami, and even that obviously fell short. So Donovan was a never realistic option, but it was certainly an option, and certainly for Miami's front office, one worth pursuing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I buy the whole thing from Donovan Mitchell posting on Instagram in his car in what looked like Los Angeles, not even in Cleveland.
He was in LA, obviously. He was in there for his camp, and that's where the front office met with him a couple days ago.
He's like, I was asked about it all year, and then, I obviously always wanted to be here. Look, you mentioned the Damian Lillard thing last year, and the Heat and Damian Lillard got in a little bit of trouble because of how dirty they made it. How much of a mess Damian Lillard and his agent Aaron Goodwin made in trying to force their way out of Portland and get to Miami, the one place that they wanted to be. And we all know what ended up happening there. Hurt feelings, betrayal, Milwaukee Bucks, right? And that's sort of what ends up happening. So I kind of stick by what I said yesterday in terms of, I think there might have been some backroom dealings with the Donovan Mitchell stuff that wasn't as loud. I do think that the Heat had to be kicking these tires. Bam Adebayo, you already mentioned, close friend of Donovan Mitchell. You basically have your messenger with Bam to talk to Donovan Mitchell. I'm sure they spoke. They had to have spoken, right? Like, I can't imagine a world where they didn't at least talk about it. I speculated that Bam Adebayo signing the extension when he did it, the day when transactions basically started happening all around the NBA on draft day, was a flare to the rest of the league saying, I'm here in Miami. If you want to play with me, you're going to have to do it here. And I thought that might have been a recruiting tactic by Bam. The problem that I think maybe the Heat ran into, if indeed they did try to figure out, okay, can we get Donovan Mitchell, is they could trade 1 first-round pick without lifting a bunch of protections on the Oklahoma City thing and the Charlotte thing. They only have 1 first-round pick to deal, and Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Nikola Jovic, whatever we think of those players, I don't know that was going to be enough for Cleveland to trade Donovan Mitchell away, right, to seriously consider that offer. Understanding that, and the whole thing was, well, if Donovan Mitchell makes a mess and threatens not to sign with any other team, well, then he can almost force his way to Miami. I think what we've learned with Donovan Mitchell throughout his career, he's not that kind of guy. He's not the make the mess type. I know he got traded from Utah to Cleveland. That was not his decision. That was Danny Ainge getting the job and wanting to blow things up and start over. He didn't want to leave Utah. Not at that moment, at least. And it doesn't seem like he ever really wanted to leave Cleveland in a serious way. And so if the Cavs felt like, all right, Donovan Mitchell's not going to make that mess, and we're not all that interested in what the Heat have to offer because we already traded all of our draft capital to get Donovan Mitchell in the first place, and we're not willing to trade him for pennies on a dollar, then I think all of that stuff worked. And then to your point earlier, Donovan Mitchell looks around and was like, we made the second round in the playoffs last year. I'm the leader of the team. I'm empowered here. I like Kenny Atkinson as a coach. I've got teammates that I play well with in terms of like guys like Jared Allen. Maybe the Darius Garland piece here can kind of help us retool around me if we kind of make some other moves throughout this offseason. And I think that's ultimately what ended up happening here, is that the Heat just don't have enough stuff to get it done. And I think there's a lot of blame, might be a strong word to go around in this particular thing. I do disagree that the front office screwed up in getting Donovan Mitchell. I know that there's a lot of I understand Heat fans being upset, right? Like, I get it. This was the guy that we all wanted. But I guess it maybe was never really a realistic option, you know?
Yeah, it's like seeing a car that's out of your price range and isn't even really for sale and being like, well, why didn't you find a way to secure that? And I know it's kind of dehumanizing to kind of make that comparison as a material object, but that's the reality. It's like there was never an opportunity for them to get in on Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes. Like the best opportunity, if there was one, was when Utah originally traded him. And at that point in time, Miami certainly didn't have the capital or the assets or whatever that Danny Ainge was looking for. There's already a frayed relationship there between Riley and Ainge. It would have been a miracle. Yeah. It would have required a miracle for Miami to be active in that pursuit. Fortunately, it never worked out that way. That's what I'm mostly disappointed in. I can't blame the front office. They're kicking the tires. They're doing what they can. There's just no way of making it happen. You can't, get blood from a stone, etc. I'm more disappointed because I actually like Donovan. I like talking to him. I like seeing him play on the court. I like his style. We've liked him for Miami for a long time since he was being drafted out of Louisville. Yeah. And I would have liked to see him in a Heat uniform, and it certainly would have provided an interesting dynamic to a team that has lacked that kind of dynamic offensive engine. And so that's the most disappointing aspect of it. But I don't put any blame on the front office for not being able to secure a player that probably wasn't going to get traded at any point in time anyway, and that they probably couldn't have secured even if they had a wealth of assets. So, it's a moot point. I think it's just frustrating. It's piling up for fans. It's the third off season where we haven't done anything, et cetera. We haven't made the kind of moves to build around Jimmy. We haven't gotten him the help that he needs, et cetera. These are the comments that from the fan base, at least what I'm seeing, what I've heard. And so I understand there's just frustration there. But you had a point to add to regarding Mitchell?
Yeah, if I can go put my conspiracy hat on for a second.
Again, twice in 2 days.
Twice in 2 days, 3 times in 4 or 5 days, and that's just my conspiracy hat. You had a conspiracy hat thrown in the mix there, so I think we're 3 conspiracy hats in 3 days now. Donovan Mitchell signed a 3-year hat trick, conspiracy hat trick. Donovan Mitchell, 3-year contract extension with a player option.
Oh boy,
for that final year in the summer of 2027, where he could become a free agent, either 2027 or 2028. I think it's 2027. Tyler Hero will be off the books at that point for the Miami Heat. The Heat, as currently constructed, have 2 players under contract for that season. Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ware, who they just took in the first round.
Good.
Donovan Mitchell can opt out that year.
Yeah.
And he will be how old at that point? 29? At that point, 29, going into his age 30 season?
Yeah.
Right about where LeBron James was, his idol.
That's the right. That's the
when
right
he
way.
made the move to Miami. You opt out, and then you sign for all the money in Miami that season.
I mean, it's certainly a possibility. I don't think that's conspirational. I don't know if that's conspiratorial.
Conspirational.
I don't know.
I
I'm
like
trying
that.
to think what's a word here. I don't think it's that. It's difficult to envision. Like Miami has done what they possibly could. They failed on some accounts, but they've tried to build a contender over the last 5 seasons with Jimmy Butler on this roster. And I think you just have to look at what's currently on the roster, what's available around the league, and realize, well, you know what? We've got to do a reset at some point, but it will take some time. And your point, a couple of seasons from now. And so that's just.
I'm sorry, 2 points of information before we move on. LeBron James was 26. Thanks to the comments for pointing that out. He was the same amount of years, though, basically, into his NBA career. And then
in his prime,
but in his prime, and it was a sort of similar situation, kind of extends off the second one and the whole thing. And I was right on the contract option year. It was 2027, 2028. So the conspiracy still holds up. Still holds up. It could just be a matter of Donovan Mitchell wanting to opt out when the salary, by then the cap will go up by 30% based on what it is now. And he's probably just going to opt out and get as much money as possible. That said, was Donovan Mitchell the only option for the Miami Heat this offseason, or could the Heat find a way to add DeMar DeRozan? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. With last-minute killer deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat feature, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets for any event you could think of, whether it's a concert, comedy show, Major League Baseball, WNBA games, whatever sporting event you might think of going to. Well, Gametime has you covered. Maybe you might even buy some Heat tickets once that schedule comes out later this summer. But anyway, they've got so many different things that make Gametime such a great resource. I mentioned already, they're all in pricing. I love it. You never have to worry about a fee coming in later on or changing the price. What you see is what you get and what you pay for. And so you know exactly what you're getting, especially also with the seat views. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly where you're going to be. Well, you know, you get the right angle of the field or the stage or whatever it is that you're looking for. So download the Gametime app today, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. You get $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply, but create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, you get $20 off. So download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Miami Heat Talk every day, 5 days a week. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Like our videos. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. Let's move on to DeMar DeRozan. The Miami Herald reported that there is mutual interest between the Heat and DeMar DeRozan, who is a free agent after 3 years in Chicago. But the easiest way to sign him would be for, obviously, the $5 million mid-level exception, which comes with some of its own limitations that we don't have to get into right now, or a minimum salary. I bring those two options up because the mid-level exception is worth $5 million. The minimum salary for somebody with DeMar DeRozan's experience would be at $3.3 million, so about $1.5 million difference. But DeRozan obviously is going to be more interested in getting more money via sign and trade, which comes with a whole bunch of other complications regarding the second apron and the first apron and all the aprons. But basically, the Heat would need to salary dump one of Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, or Duncan Robinson to make it happen. So what do you think of the Heat's interest in DeMar DeRozan, and is jumping through all these hoops worth it for somebody who's going to be 35 years old next year? Or next season, I should say, that later this year.
Yeah, I think there's always interest. I think they've had interest in DeMar for a while, but at the right price. I think there's a respect there as a veteran, as a guy with a fringe Hall of Fame level career. And given all that, I think they'd love to have him as an option just because, Spo tends to, again, gravitate towards those veterans that have proven at a high level. You get a guy who knows how to operate offensively with the ball, a solid passer, defender, even at this stage in his career. I think there's absolutely interest, but no to your point, I don't think the running through hoops is the right approach there. I just don't think there's not going to be a good opportunity to pick up DeRozan. And as decent a player as he is, even at this stage in his career, I don't see trading Hero or Rozier or anybody on the roster, or Duncan certainly, to acquire a player of DeRozan's caliber as the right move. At least that's just not how I see it. I like DeRozan just fine. I don't know that trading the players you have, if you can get him as again another option on the roster, do it. Great, I love it. I don't know whether he starts. I don't know what his role would be. I don't care. You get a player like that, that's fine. But to trade a player that you currently have on the roster in order to acquire DeRozan, I don't think it's a right move.
24 points per game last year. The best thing about DeMar DeRozan and why I think he would be so appealing to the Heat is he played 79 games, 74 games, and 76 games over the last 3 years. The guy plays. He's durable. He shows up. He shows up in fourth quarters where the Heat were really bad last year. There's a lot of things to like about DeMar DeRozan. Now, how does he fit on a roster with Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler? And maybe Tyler Hero or not, depending on how they would have to do a salary dump, whether it was Hero or somebody else. A lot of guys who really like to take mid-range shots and in terms of DeRozan, Bam, and Jimmy, don't like to take a ton of three-pointers either. And if floor spacing was an issue last year, it would be more of an issue maybe this with all those guys. But that said, I don't know that the Heat are in a position to be super picky. And DeMar DeRozan would certainly help an offense that ranked 21st in offensive rating last year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. A little bit. He's not making them elite. He's not making them elite, but you move up a couple spots in the rankings with DeRozan, I think at least.
And top 20.
So I understand if the Heat were like, hey, man, we love you. We love your game. We think you'd be a great fit here in Miami. If you can't get that full mid-level exception, which is about $13 million from somewhere else, we've got maybe the $5 million exception waiting for you, or even the $3.3 million veteran minimum for you on a one-year prove-it deal. If you could get him on 1 year also, the reason I think it would be appealing for the Heat is you would not be sacrificing any long-term flexibility. And if you were to salary dump one of those longer-term contracts, it'd actually create more long-term flexibility, assuming that DeRozan was only going to want to sign for 1 year so that he can maximize his earning power a year from now, right? When maybe there's a better, more bullish free agent market for him. So in terms of the jumping through the hoops, Utah and Detroit are the two teams left with real cap space that would be able to just sort of absorb one of those three contracts, Hero, Rozier, or Duncan Robinson. I don't know what it would take to get them to take that. I know it's been speculated out there, just trade Tyler Hero to Detroit and get a pick back. I don't think the Pistons are in the business of giving away picks. I think they want to get picks to use their salary cap space. And as good as Tyler Hero is, and as much as a fit he might be for the Pistons, which I think is exactly what they need in terms of an elite shooter to space the floor around Cunningham and Thompson and Holland and all these guys that they have, they're not like, are they trying to win right away? I don't get that impression at all. Like, what do they care about right fits and all that stuff? That's not exactly where they are in their timeline. And even with Hero being as young as he is, that said, could you trade him there? Perhaps, yeah. I mean, they got to do something with that cap space, but I don't know that you're getting assets back for Tyler Hero. Right? You might actually have to attach an asset to Tyler Hero, because if we believe the reporting of, the Lakers are going to be in on DeMar DeRozan. There's going to be other teams that the Clippers could potentially be in on DeMar. Like the Sacramento Kings might be interested in acquiring DeMar DeRozan. There's going to be a lot of teams looking to use Detroit or Utah for their salary cap space. They are sort of they're in the driver's seat. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have to give stuff away. They could just sit here and be like, just give us your player, or attach some second-round picks to him, or whatever it might be. Like, there's competition, in other words, for that cap space. So I don't think the Heat are in a position to say, you want our player, we also want a first-round pick back, right? And I think the same thing goes for the Utah Jazz, right? Maybe if they're looking at trading Lauri Markkanen to the Warriors, which is the newest report, is that the Warriors are sort of going all in on Lauri Markkanen or wherever they trade him, maybe they'd be more interested in sort of launching a rebuild. But if that's the case, if they're rebuilding, why are they going to give away picks for a player like Tyler Hero who's already on a big contract, or Duncan Robinson who's going to be 30 years old and all these things? So I don't know. I think it's going to be really difficult. And if we're talking about Hero or Rozier or Duncan Robinson plus the limited amount of assets that the Heat already have, and you're trading that for 1 year of DeMar DeRozan, essentially, because that's what that would amount to be, that's a tough trade to make, unless you are basically making it for the salary cap flexibility going to next year, which you may or may not already have, depending on what Jimmy Butler does with his player options. So that was the long-winded way to kind of get around it, but I wanted to get all the sort of machinations.
No, yeah, it's good to clarify that, because I think I can't say for certain, but I think Hero's kind of a net neutral asset at this point in time.
Maybe even
Like,
negative in this new CBA.
Yeah.
It's really hard to carry a guy at $30 million. It just is.
Maybe. I still think, given his age and what we've seen from him, as frustrated as Heat fans are, I still think that there's immense potential and value that has not been realized 100%. And
We
I
agree
think
on that.
Still the opportunity.
I'm just saying it's tough to carry a guy at $29 million regardless.
I know.
mean,
I hear you.
Even the Celtics just paid Derek White that amount of money, and they're above the second apron, right? Like, and the only reason they're doing that is because they just won the championship, and their owner might sell the team and he doesn't even care.
Yeah, somebody else's price tag. I don't care about it. Yeah. So it's something to consider. Like, like you're not going to get a player of equal value, or certainly not an improvement. Like, I'm trying to think, like, what is even the option out there for Miami? Like, what's a player that's making a similar amount of salary as Tyler that you could just trade, like, not even including any picks or anything,
just like
that.
A straight up deal.
Yeah. And if that's the case, you're probably not going to get a player that's going to help Miami this season. And your best chances, from Miami's perspective, is to keep Hero on the roster and just, again, bank on internal development. Like, I know that's a difficult pill for people to swallow, but it's just, when you look at a player like Tyler, who's 23 still, right?
23, 24, yeah.
23, 24, still young. Still a good scorer in this league. And yeah, I understand that he didn't take over
24 in January.
24.
Sorry.
Okay. So he didn't take over games in the playoffs. I think when you look at Miami's options offensively out there, like, and as good as Boston's defense was, it was more difficult for Tyler to be able to take over the game than had Jimmy been out there, had Terry been out there. And I know we could play the what if game, but those are the facts. Like, Tyler
Hero's job
has
was never
physical
to
limitations.
beat the Celtics by himself. Yeah. Tyler Hero's job was never to lead a playoff championship level offense. That was never the expectation with Tyler Hero. Maybe it was the expectation from him, but what else is he supposed to say when he says, I want to be in the same conversation as Luke and Trey? Of course he's going to say that. All these players have crazy confidence, egos, all this stuff. I don't think the Heat's front office ever expected Tyler Hero to be the number one option on an offense that could beat a championship level defense like the Boston Celtics, right? But they had no other option in the first round of the playoffs when all their guys were hurt. So I'm agreeing with your point overall, and I think that's why Heat fans are so frustrated with Tyler Hero, is because he didn't become that number one option. But my argument always was Jimmy Butler is supposed to be that player.
Right.
Tyler Hero was never supposed to be that player. Players like Tyler Hero aren't that. That's like asking Jordan Clarkson to also be that. He's not that player. It's just players with that body type aren't that player. They just aren't.
Yeah,
so
think about that. Think about that. Like, Clarkson was like a sixth man of the year, great player. Everybody was talking about his value on a team that had just won a championship. Then he gets traded to Washington immediately afterwards, and everybody's like, man, that guy sucks. He's terrible. He's horrible. Like, he went through a lot, and his reputation around the league took a significant hit. Well, you know what? It's different when you're playing with Tyus Jones and Kyle Kuzma on a Washington team that doesn't give a damn about winning anything, as opposed to a championship level organization, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, etc., in Golden State. Like, those are two very, very different things. So
that's not to say that Hero can't improve. Like, he needs to definitely lean more into the being off the ball, off the catch shooter, all the stuff that makes him really special, which I always said, the guy's maybe one of the 5 best three-point shooters in the league. It would be a lot better if he was taking 8 to 10 three-pointers a game, as opposed to dancing his way into these contested mid-range jumpers and floaters, especially considering that he's not very good at getting to the rim or the foul line. Then don't do that. Just be one of the best three-point shooters that we've seen in the league. Be Klay Thompson, right? Be that, and work hard defensively and do what you can on that end. But that's going to be, I guess, where the Heat got to go with this, because I think you and I agree. We'll keep tabs on the DeMar DeRozan thing. We're getting reporting from Barry Jackson from the Herald that they're going to call him within the next 24 hours and see if you can get him on the mid-level exception or the minimum. Then yes, you absolutely do it. Just do it and figure out. You mentioned some of the questions, the fit and all that. Just figure that out later. Just go get the talent and figure it out later. But jumping through all these hoops and potentially having to attach more stuff to the stuff you already have to send out, that's really tough for a 35-year-old DeMar DeRozan. That said, how did we get to this point with so few options? And is the front office at fault? We talk about how we got here next on Locked On Heat. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. For those watching live here in the live stream on YouTube, leave your questions in the comment section. We'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the show. How has the front office gotten to this point with so few options, with one tradable first-round pick, one tradable second-round pick, zero cap space, flirting with the second tax apron for a team that was in the play-in tournament 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Watching big name after big name get traded and go by. You've got teams like the Knicks able to still make moves for a guy like Mikal Bridges. You've got the Sixers able to add Paul George. You've got the Magic even adding to their team this year and winning the division last year over Miami. How did we get to this point? How much is the front office at fault? I've got sort of a timeline of things here, but before I get to all of that, just the general idea that the front office is at fault. What do you think about it?
I don't agree. I don't care. Like, I know that there's frustration, but they made moves to win. And I've said it for a long time now. I think the Heat were at a very difficult spot in 2019 when they acquired Jimmy. And then the expectations were somewhat mitigated because they didn't have a great team. And who knew what Jimmy was capable of? I don't think anybody saw Jimmy in 2019 and said, you know what? He's going to carry us to title contention. And then everything went ass over tea kettle with the pandemic and bubble, and they weren't able to somehow get into the NBA Finals in the Orlando bubble. And I think that changed the timeline around. And from that point forward, you know, they were just not able to follow a simple timeline. Like, again, it was different in 2008. Like, they started trading away contracts. They wanted to keep players that were on short-term deals, knowing that in 2010, they wanted full flexibility because that's when Dwayne's contract was up. That's when LeBron's contract were up. That's when Chris Bosh's contract was up. That was a timeline that they could manage and prepare for. This was not one. So they had soft plans here and there. They had plans to acquire Giannis Antetokounmpo. That didn't work out. They had plans to acquire Kevin Durant. That didn't work out. They've had plans to acquire other players to complement Jimmy Butler. The one move or the few moves that they could make specifically in 2021, no, 2020, what was it? 2022 was when they acquired Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker. And that was a good move. Those were good moves that were highly lauded at the time. They took a team that had just been swept the year before, and they were, that was 2021, actually. They were swept the year before, and they said, you know what? We have two areas of weakness. We need somebody who can stretch the floor, who can be a versatile defender at the power forward spot. That was where Tucker came in. We need a point guard who provides leadership and point of attack defense. That's where Larry came in. And that was it. And then they had hope that Bam would take a small leap, that Tyler would take a big leap from where he was as a rookie or a second-year player. And some of those things happened, and some of those things, unfortunately, didn't manifest the way they expected them to. But they've made attempts to acquire players. Even last year, Damian Lillard. This year, you know, Donovan Mitchell. How realistic or how far along those things came along, maybe they can absorb some of the blame for that. But I just think things happen. Like, there are, you know, Donovan only plays for one team right now. And so are 29 other teams at fault then for not having Donovan Mitchell on their roster? I don't know. Like, Miami, my thing is, and I've talked to a lot of fans about this, it's like, you know what? For all the frustration about, oh, we didn't get this guy or we didn't pull out that transaction, you know what the team has done? They've won a lot of goddamn games over the last 5 years. They've been to the finals twice. They've been to the Eastern Conference 3 times. Like, those things matter. There are teams like that haven't even – look at the Knicks. Yeah, they've spent a lot of money. They've made a lot of moves. Guess what? They haven't even been to the Eastern Conference finals since Patrick Ewing led them there. Like, when's the last time that they've been as a good team and made a deep playoff run? They play in New York. Like, if there's a city that can attract superstar players, it's New York. Everybody wants to play there, James Dolan or not. And so they haven't been sniffed at not even a tenth of the success that Miami has had over the last few seasons. So that's a front office that mismanages things, that doesn't plan, that has gone all in on bad players. Miami is not that front office. Miami has had their hands tied behind their back because of the CBA and because of some restrictions here along the way. They paid money out to players maybe that didn't work out, either Tyler or Kyle or somebody else, Duncan maybe. But you know what? At the end, they've had enough to win a lot of games. They just haven't had enough to win a championship. And I think that's the problem. Is it had Jimmy hit that shot a couple seasons ago in the Eastern Conference Finals, and they go into the NBA Finals and they face Golden State Warriors, and they're a team that's healthier and better prepared to match up against the Warriors, and they win a ring. Does anybody still have these kind of concerns? Does anybody voice this frustration? Had Bam and Goran been healthy in 2020 in the Orlando bubble, does anybody care about Miami and sleepy Pat and not acquiring this guy or the other? I don't know. I think that all that complaining goes away, but instead you're kind of left here with transactional blue balls and frustration. And it's just like, I understand that there's a boiling point, but the reality is this team has just won a lot of games. And I think people should be happy and satisfied with what they've done on the court, not off the court.
You're right.
Counterpoint.
It's been, however, right. You're right, but I understand the frustration when you have a guy like Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and a coach like Eric Spoelstra, and the team seemingly cannot maximize the window. And for what's going to be 2 years in a row now, have essentially run it back. And they are running it back because they are swinging and missing on stars that they might not have any business trying to chase in the first place. Where maybe if they had done some of the things that Boston and New York have been doing, which is we have our star, let's go get the high-level role players to surround them with, let's go get the guys who fit with them, then maybe there's an argument to be made that they do maximize that window, right? So I can understand where a fan would be like, what are you doing? Like, what dream world is this front office living in where they just think that these star players are going to force their way to Miami the way that Jimmy Butler did, and just say, is that the strategy? Is just hoping to get lucky? Is that really the strategy here? I can understand the frustration with the fan base there. Like, just because you're trying to do it doesn't make it a smart thing to do, right? And so I think...
Can I just say one thing, though? Like, I mean, not to counter completely, but, like, Jimmy is not that star. Like, they had to... Like, Boston kind of sucked for a long while, and maybe we've all forgotten that because they've been flirting with success in the Eastern Conference and they just won a title, but they kind of stunk for a long time there when Miami was actually a good team. And I think we've kind of overlooked that process, and they had those top draft picks for a reason. Yes, they fleeced the Brooklyn Nets.
Well, that's why they had them. I mean, they were a middling team. They didn't stink. Like, they weren't as bad as the Brooklyn Nets were, you know? Like, those, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown came via the Nets
before 2008. Trade. Again, before Kevin McHale gifted Kevin Garnett to the Boston Celtics to do his old team a solid.
Going really far back.
Well, I mean that's, and then after that, what they traded those guys to the Brooklyn Nets, and they had all those picks, and that took some time in order for it to manifest into something tangible. And yeah, they were good. They were a playoff team. They were okay, but they had two different players that they drafted in the top 5 in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, who've turned into all-stars, and that's something to build around. And those guys were on much friendlier contracts than Jimmy Butler's were when he was acquired in 2019.
So this is sort of the point, though, isn't it? We live in a new world with the CBA and the second tax apron, all the cap limitations that these front offices have to deal with, that Pat Riley has spent the last 2 end-of-season press conferences talking about the new CBA and the second apron and how limiting it is. And yet this Heat team, rightly or wrongly, hasn't been prepared for this world, right? They ignored draft picks for years, devalued them in a way that I think was detrimental to the franchise for years. And it turned out that you need those draft picks to build sustainable teams on the cheap, like you're talking about, to get guys on rookie scale contracts, right? And I do have the timeline here. So this is my point. I think that this team, I think the new CBA and all this stuff washed over this front office before they were prepared for it. And they're drowning a little bit in it right now. And yes, your point is Jimmy Butler was never really supposed to be that guy when they acquired him, and he turned out to be that guy, and that's been awesome. Yeah. And it's been a really great way to kind of float through this process of trying to rebuild basically the whole way that you build a team. And we've seen, and I've said this before, this team is now built through the draft. There is an acknowledgement by this front office Pluck Jimmy Butler, take him off the roster. The whole team's built through the draft.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? With the exception of a couple of guys. So here's where it really, if I'm starting to look at where things, I guess, went wrong, quote unquote, right? You trade for Goran Dragic 2 future first-round picks, the 2016 and the 2018 picks. Those picks ended up not being very valuable for Miami. They ended up being the 20s at the end of the first round. That was a good trade at the time. I have no problem with it. But that was sort of the first one where post LeBron, you start trading away future draft capital to try to maximize the present. Obviously, it didn't exactly work. The 2020 bubble, maybe sort of the last legs of the Goran Dragic experience. Then again, you got injured in the finals like you talked about before. Whatever. In 2019, they trade a 2023 first-round pick to the Clippers in the big deal that ends up getting them Jimmy Butler, right? Where they created all that cap space and all those things. Incredibly creative trade for the Heat to create cap space out of no cap space, the ability to sign and trade for Jimmy Butler. Incredible trade. I'm not saying that was the wrong move, but that 2023 pick, they ended up pushing the protections on it to 2025. Again, not the wrong move, because by doing that, they got Jaime Jaquez Jr. with the 18th pick because they pushed those protections over, who ends up being the steal of the draft. Not the wrong move, and yet the Heat still owe that pick, even from that Jimmy Butler trade in 2019. They owe a pick now in 2025 that's top 14 protected. And if the Heat end up getting one of the top 14 picks in this next draft, that'll be moved over to 2026. So you've got that. The other one in 2019, they trade 3 second-round picks for KZ Okpala. The 2025 pick is basically fake. It's one of those fake second-round picks, so the Heat are probably going to have their pick in the second round this coming year, but they can't trade it. And we've seen how these second-round picks grace the wheels in these trades, so that's been hurtful for them. They also, the 2026 pick that they moved in the KZ Okpala trade, that's a real pick, so they don't have that 2026 pick. Then they don't own any of their 2026 picks between now and 2030. All of them have been trading in salary dumps for Myers Leonard, dumping Dwayne Dedmon, dumping Victor Oladipo, who cost you 2 second-round picks. And when I talk about them not being prepared for the new CBA, the Heat used to just buy second-round picks. Trade these. We don't need them. We'll just buy them. Well, guess what? The new CBA signed last summer doesn't let you buy second-round picks, because if you do, you trigger the second apron hard cap. So you can't even really do that anymore. It's not really an option. So Miami's best way of getting those second-round picks that they thought they would have when they traded these all away is now gone. So that's a problem. And the bigger problem, again, is that it takes away a really important asset for you in terms of greasing the wheels and trades, kind of getting you over the hump. They trade a 2027 first-round pick to Charlotte for Terry Rozier in February. And that's where I want to talk about now. Because we can go back to DeMar DeRozan, who, and I didn't mention this before, you know who he's managed by? You know who he's represented by?
No.
Aaron Goodwin. Our old friend. Damon Lillard's agent. Nice. The Heat traded Kyle Lowry's expiring contract and a 2027 first-round pick for Terry Rozier. And I'm wondering if that was a mistake. Rozier played 31 games last year, averaged 16 points a game, 4.5 assists, shot 42% overall. Wasn't exactly the most productive player. I know that he was beset by injuries and wasn't there in the first round. And everything is hindsight. But in hindsight, that ended up being a bad trade. It ended up being a bad trade because if you didn't have Terry Rozier, if you didn't make the trade, you have the cap space, at least or you have the space in terms of the luxury tax where you would have this mid-level exception, the full one that you can offer DeMar DeRozan, that you can offer to these other players. And I don't know that Terry Rozier was going to be enough of an upgrade. Now, he's got to have a really big bounce-back year in his second year with Miami, and maybe all this stuff looks fine. But based on the sample that we've gotten so far, that wasn't a good trade. And part of the reason the Heat are where they are against the second tax with no real way to improve is because they made that deal, and they've kind of punted on the financial flexibility that Lowry's expiring contract would have given them. So I'll ask you the question. Do you think in hindsight the Rozier trade was a mistake?
No, I don't. I still think the potential was there last year. You know, it didn't work out that way. You have to look at it from that point of view. It's like, you know, was it the right move at the time, given that Lowry, you know, was not producing and that Terry was producing at a high level? Like, I mean, I think both you and I were really bullish about the Rozier trade. Like when it happened, like he was going to provide an aspect of playmaking and rim attack that Miami had been lacking. And that was perfectly complementary of a team that had Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and Jimmy Butler. Just those things never manifested. Like all those players went down with injury. Terry went down with her injury, and then you go into the playoffs and you lack either Jimmy or Terry. And that's, I hate to say it, had we been healthy, had Miami been healthy, but that's the reality. They assembled a team that didn't work out that way, and that's just how it plays out in the NBA sometimes. And there's only so much you can do to overcompensate for a lack of health. Will they be healthy next year? That's a huge question. It's always looming over any franchise and any playoff run. And certainly, look at the Knicks. The Knicks were this close to being able to move on to the Eastern Conference Finals, and guess what? They broke down. Are people blaming Tibbs after what was viewed as a really magical season? They made some moves. They acquired OG Anunoby, and everybody's like, "Oh man, this is it. This is the move. They're all in." The Knicks are a really good team. And I like the Knicks roster construction, but you're also talking about a coach that has historically run his players into the ground. And Anunoby is going to get hurt at some point. And, are they a title contender if everything breaks right? Absolutely. But you could say that about so many teams. I think you could say that about Miami. I still think you could say that about Miami. If Miami is healthy and all these players work together the way that this front office envisions them to, they could be a title contender, It just hasn't worked out that way.
I just the whole idea of expecting this team to be healthy is the problem to me, right? They never have been. Jimmy Butler's going to be 35 years old, and we also have seen a pretty good sample size of Jimmy and Bam and Hero together over their last 2 years. I know it's been on and off with injuries, but they've played 79 games together, those three, over the last 3 years, over the last 2 seasons, and they've gone 40-39 in those games. That's not good enough for your big three, right? And to your Knicks point, they had a guy that they really liked in RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley and traded him for a better fit, right? In OG Anunoby. And I think that if this front office could be criticized for anything since 2019, it just feels like they haven't been awfully creative and been ahead of what they need to be ahead of in terms of where the league is going, valuing draft picks. They value their own draft picks. They've not valued acquiring more draft picks or cap flexibility.
They've made mistakes
or anything like that. And you look at even the Celtics thing that you referenced in 2013, they traded 2 franchise icons in Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, and that laid the groundwork for the championship they just won. Sure, it was 11 years later, but it wasn't like they were bad. For Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown as rookies were playing in the conference finals, or second-year players were playing in the conference finals. That was a lot of success over the last half decade for Boston until they finally won a championship, right?
And look, to those fans that are frustrated about Jimmy being on this roster, that's still a possibility. They could still wind up making the major reset that everybody's talking about. And trade Jimmy.
This is where I'm at now. We know what this is. And yeah, sure. Maybe and I agree with you, by the way. I think contract year Jimmy Butler and better injury luck, which is, and I said this, and while I just said this team is always not healthy, they're not always as hurt as they were last year, right? There's extremes to this, right? That was an absolute year from hell. So if you can just have a little bit better injury luck, and that your basically entire starting lineup isn't hurt for the first round of the playoffs, then there's a world where this team can make real some noise in the playoffs. But expecting them to win a championship, that seems unrealistic to me. Right? When the Celtics are better than the last time you played them at full strength. The 76ers are certainly better. The Knicks are definitely better than the last time you played them 2 years ago at full strength. The Pacers are better. The Magic have the division belt. The rest, the Cavaliers are better. The rest of the conference is better. And you've gotten maybe worse when you consider that you've lost Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, and probably Caleb Martin and maybe Haywood Highsmith in 2 summers, and haven't really added anything outside of Terry Rozier, who's dealing with a neck injury concern right now. So I don't really know that this team is currently constructed makes much sense in terms of what the direction for this front office is. Because even if Jimmy Butler does opt out of his player option, which we don't know, it's entirely up to him. He can make that decision, and we'll make that decision 12 months from now. But even if Jimmy Butler does walk away from that player option and the Heat have $30 million worth of cap space, there's I don't know who's going to be available to use that cap space on. It doesn't really look like there could be a Paul George in free agency next year, other than it's going to be Jimmy Butler, presumably. And you still don't have much draft capital. Next year, your 1 first-round pick, that turns into 2 available first-round picks next summer. You're kind of just in the same spot, just without Jimmy Butler. So I just feel like you need to make a real effort to choose a direction here if you're the Heat's front office, so that you're not constantly behind these other front offices that are able to. Yeah, I even look at something Houston did and being able to maneuver to get the Phoenix picks. That's incredibly creative, where they're now able to pounce on perhaps Devin Booker in a year or 2. Ooh. Like this is the stuff that the Heat's front office, where they used to play chess and not checkers to go get LeBron, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh in 2010. They're not doing that anymore.
We're also narrow-minded here and short-sighted. You know, it's like, how many years did we clown on the Knicks for we're clearing all this cap space, we're doing all this, we're going to suck for years on end so that we can get X superstar because we've heard that they want to come here, and it didn't happen year after year after year, and they just lost and lost.
They changed their approach. They said, we're not going to worry about the cap space. We're going to go find players who fit, and they got lucky in a way, in that Jalen Brunson turned out to be the player that he is. But very similar to the way that the Heat got lucky that Jimmy Butler ended up being the player he was, right?
It helps to hire their dad. Like, I mean, I think that's...
But hey, you did it. Like, and to your point, like, the Heat are still in that backwards world of, let's just hope somebody forces their way to Miami the way the Knicks were, and they have not yet really adjusted, it doesn't look like, the way the Knicks have.
I don't know if Mr. Maxey is an assistant coach out there somewhere, but if you want to get him on the Heat coaching staff, that seems like a good opportunity, right? I don't know, like the next player that might be available.
I appreciate the joke, but like, even with the Knicks, they stopped trading their draft picks until the point where the guy that they wanted, the guy they targeted, Mikal Bridges, was available, right? They traded the players that were hard. They made hard decisions trading players that they really liked for players who were better fits.
Isn't there that view though? Like, again, maybe, you know, as a person who likes sci-fi and comic books and all that stuff like that, there's a divergent road, another dimension somehow, where last year they're healthy after the acquisition of Terry Rozier, and maybe they're in the play-in tournament, maybe they're not, maybe they get into the 6th seed and they stay healthy and they go on to win, and they win throughout the Eastern Conference, and they punch Boston in the face the way that they have years in the past. Porzingis is hurt in the first round because Porzingis is 7'4" and he's going to get hurt. And they somehow managed to get into the NBA Finals. And again, this divergent possibility, you know, where they win a championship. Does anybody give a damn that they traded a first-round pick for Terry Rozier if it winds up in a championship last year? Or are we all just griping about something that happened when there was the possibility that it didn't?
I guess, but that's...
Are we calling this team short-sighted?
That's a real big hypothetical.
Okay, Josh Hart, a couple seasons ago. Like, let's say he doesn't roll into Jimmy's ankle being, you know, a jackass that throws himself around with high energy or whatever. Don't they? If Jimmy is like nuclear the way he was early in the playoffs?
He was for a one playoff series. He really wasn't even that much against the Knicks.
He got hurt at the beginning of the second playoff series, so that's what it was. But like, they had everything dialed up at such a high level. You know, again, he was hurt the year before.
Jokic is the best player in the world. Jimmy Butler isn't.
I get it. Like, you know, again, like, are we even complaining if Bam doesn't, you know, almost lose his shoulder in 2020?
Okay, I understand the point you're making. And look, I have no problem with the Heat. These last 5 years have been awesome. You and I talk about this all the time, right? Championship or no championship, you can't complain about what these last 5 years have been. But you can complain about where the organization is going when Jimmy Butler is 35 years old and the team was as hurt as they've been over the last couple of years. Like, the trends are the trends here, right?
You covered the Warriors. You covered the Warriors.
Yeah.
That's a team that won. And they had a super team, a dynastic team. They got they got Kevin Durant at a point when things broke so perfectly for them that they were able to build a super team, and they built a dynasty in that short time period. Is there any frustration that, like, you know, that they might stink for the next couple of years? Or was there frustration during the 2 years when you covered the team, when they were a lottery bound team and just couldn't do anything?
Yeah.
Knowing that they had won over those last few years?
Yes.
Okay. So if there's frustration, If
there's
there's
frustration now
over
for the Warriors, and they won a miracle title in 2022.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then you know what? Then the reality is that there's just no pleasing people, and I don't even know.
No, I think we're confusing what the team has done and where the team is going. Whatever you did in the past is awesome. Like, nobody's complaining about that. It's, where is the team going? Otherwise, why am I spending my money? Why am I taking up my nights? Why am I putting the Heat game on TV and on Tuesday night when I could be spending time with my family if I don't know, if it feels like this team isn't going anywhere? Why am I investing money in season tickets if I feel like the direction of the team isn't going where? That's what sports are all about. Hey, we won the championship. Now what? The Celtics won the championship, and now we're asking, can they win it again? Celtics fans are saying, can we win it again? The Panthers just won the Stanley Cup. We're talking about, can they do it again? Right? Within days, we're talking about, are they retaining their own free agents? It's just, that's the way sports are. I have no regrets over how the last 5 years played out if I'm the Heat. But their job isn't to rest on their laurels and be like, well, that was sick. Like Pat Riley, Andy Ellsberg, Adam Simon, their job is to keep getting better, right?
And they've done what they could, though. I mean, they got like nice.
Are they
young
doing
players.
what they? To me, have they been lapped by the rest of the league? I guess is my concern. Is their approach in how to improve the team, which is go for whales, go for whales, go for whales, hope the whale forces his way to Miami. It's just outdated. It's outdated.
But it wasn't just a whale, though. Like, they went after Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker 3 years ago.
That was the right move.
Like,
that was a good offseason. I defended that as the best thing they did. And then that was it. And then they
haven't always gone out for whales. They've gone out for whales to complement their two all-stars. That, you know, for everybody trashing now the high-level contracts to Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, those were two. Let's say Tyler doesn't develop into an all-star. You know, he's just a high-level role player at best throughout his career. Duncan also a pretty decent role player who put up historic numbers as a three-point shooter. So his value, I don't think it can be questioned. How do you acquire said superstars without these chunky contracts that you're awarding to Hero and Duncan? Had Hero
draft picks that you traded away.
Draft picks that they traded away. Look, the Opala one, you know, that was a head scratcher. I don't know where for a team that has for a team that has done so well drafting, I'd say Opala and blowing the pick on Achua, but also again taking, you know, we've debated this a lot. You know, the Maxey pick, whatever, you know, who knows how that would have manifested had they drafted Maxey instead of Achua. But there was also, again, no footage on players because it was, you know, the pandemic, and these players just didn't get an opportunity to put on the kind of show that they had in years past and years since. So it was a very different opportunity to scout these players, and maybe they just saw a guy who had this incredible athleticism.
I'm with you on that. Like, I have no problem with the Achua pick over Maxey. At the time I didn't, and it's I hate when we're talking about picks in the middle of the first round, and all of a sudden you're doing the front office really screwed up there. Like, okay, like what are they gonna do? They're gonna find the best player in the rest of the draft with every pick. It's just a little bit of an unrealistic option. And to your point, if you look at how the Heat have drafted over the last few years, they've been awesome. Jaime Jaquez Jr., Nikola Jovic, right? Like those are all great picks. Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, great picks for where they were chosen. So I guess, but to my point is, going forward, shouldn't you be finding ways to acquire more draft picks? Where you see, for example, the Dallas Mavericks trade Tim Hardaway Jr. into Detroit's cap space. Like, they had to attach, they had to attach second round picks in that. But you've seen teams trade players for draft picks in the past. And it just feels like the Heat are so reactive on all this stuff, where they don't get Damian Lillard and then they scramble. They don't get Donovan Mitchell and then they scramble. And so that's what I think the fan base is frustrated by, is the lack of a real plan, like a realistic plan that isn't hope to get superstar. Like, if you don't have the draft picks, go get them.
Is the plan then, you know, oh great, Jimmy, we don't give a damn what you are talking about? Like, that's, you know, for all we've had this debate so many times.
That's a fair point. You can't really trade away helpful players while you have Butler on the roster.
So the only move, and we said this, and people say you guys are so eager to talk about trading Jimmy. It's like, you're not getting a plethora of draft picks for Tyler Hero. You're not getting a plethora of draft picks for anybody on this roster other than Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. And who knows what you'd be getting for Jimmy Butler? Like the one opportunity to do that, at least from what we've heard, was Philadelphia. And guess what? They just acquired Paul George without having to give up any of their draft picks, and they're much happier as a result. So there isn't a world where these things happen. Like I don't know where you're going to get these mystery draft picks out of anywhere for trading the players that are currently on Miami's roster. And maybe they've overvalued them, but they still contribute, and they've contributed to winning, the point I just made. So maybe I should make a flow chart of my own here to go along with your transactional flow chart. But I think that's just, they've won. They've had the role players. The role players have stepped up, and maybe they overvalued them. But at the same time, like Gabe Vincent got a lot of money from the Lakers. Max Strus got a lot of money from the Cavaliers, and they weren't getting paid anything here in Miami. And they still contributed to a hell of a finals run that made a lot of fans in South Florida happy. I don't know. I mean, I want to open it up to questions, because I want to like. We
haven't gotten that many. Mostly people are just fighting in the comments, which is fine.
Okay, all right, okay. Let me just address this. Anything for access. Like I gotta say this. Like, what do you people think happens here? That if I'm kissing Heat PR's ass, I'm going to get like more interviews or anything like that? Like my credentials just go away if I say Pat Riley's old and sleepy? You know, like what do you think happens? Like there are Heat people listening to the show right now, and they're fine with when we've been critical of the show. So no, I'm sorry. I don't get my access taken away or denied by trashing the team or complimenting the team. So that's not how it works. We've done the work. We've been covering this team for a decade, and that's what works. That's how it works out. So I
think that the Heat have had the right general approach. Although the right thing was the Lowry Tucker thing. I think they got played on the Kevin Durant front, and both sides kind of screwed up the Damian Lillard thing. And to your point too, we're talking about a very different thing probably if they're able to get Damian Lillard. But even the process of getting Damian Lillard, hoping and praying that a star player was going to force his way for pennies on the dollar, that I don't know that approach works anymore in the NBA. And I think I'm at the point now where whatever we can say about all that stuff, no regrets over the last 5 years. But we're going into year 6 of this core, and that's an eternity in the NBA. And I just need to know where this thing is going. Is it always going to be hope and pray for a star? Or is this a team that is actually saying, hey, last dance with Jimmy Butler. Hopefully he opts out. We create the cap flexibility that we need, and then we start rebuilding. And if that's the position here, then okay. Like I'm in. I just need to know where it's going. Can't both things
happen?
What?
Can't both of that happen? Like they hope for a star. They've got a star on their team, in Jimmy Butler at this point in his career, that they can move to acquire whatever disgruntled superstar becomes available.
I mean, that's what they've been trying to do for 2 years. Right. And it hasn't worked.
And it hasn't worked, but
and that's my point. I don't think that works anymore in the NBA.
What works? What works in the NBA? Like there's no recipe for success in the NBA. A lot of it is luck and putting yourself in a situation where you can capitalize on that
second part.
And some other team's misfortune.
Well,
and Miami's done that. They've won for 5 years. Like they put themselves in a spot. I don't know. I keep coming back to that, and like that's it.
I agree with you. But are they going to win for the next 5 years? It doesn't look like it.
No, but then you reset. Then
that's what I'm talking about. How?
Well, Jimmy's not going to be playing 5 years from now. I think that's.
Well, I'm talking about next year. Like we gotta. Like what's? I guess.
What do you mean next year? 24, 25, or 25, 26? Are you talking about the 2 years seasons from now?
After this coming season, when Jimmy Butler can opt out, following that year. I just want to know what this team is doing.
You're kind of stuck.
To
prepare themselves. If he opts in, you trade him.
Right. So then maybe that's what happens here. But but he can opt out and walk away for nothing. I think I'm with you. Is that no formula is guaranteed to get yourself a championship. But I do know that only banking on one is probably the wrong way to go. The Heat are extremely limited here. Where they are now, going forward.
with the assessment that there's only been one strategy here. Like they've gone after a whale when they accept them when they have it.
For the last 3 years, they have.
No, 3 years ago they got Kyle Lowry.
Right,
and PJ
last 2
Tucker.
years they have. The last 2 years they have.
And what else they had? They had all the role players they needed. What else was there?
Lowry Lowry aged out. PJ Tucker left after 1 year. Do that again. Okay. I would have said do that again.
I get it.
That was the big mistake.
Instead of going after Dame Lillard, and I disagree with that, and we totally disagree.
I know we should. They really did screw it up. That's what I'm saying. There's not one thing that you could point at and just say that was the screw up. That was the major screw up there. There's not one thing you can point at in this entire era, the last 5 years, that you could point at and say they really pooped themselves there. You can't do it. My point is, Jimmy's 35. This thing's over, in my opinion. Right? Like, the chance to win a championship, the window's closed. And your job as a front office is to figure out how to open it up again. And I want to know what they plan to do that is. I'm with you. I'm not here being like the front office is asleep and all these things. I just don't where they are at right now. And this will be my last point. My last point here. Where they are at right now is pretty bleak. And the front office's job right now, in terms of asset management and all these things, and where they are at right now, and where the front office needs to do right now, or I should say over the next 12 months, is figure out how they're going to pivot post whatever this era is. And it might be without Jimmy Butler.
I just don't think it's bleak.
One draft pick, no cap space. How's that not bleak?
It's like the assessment that, what was it, Zach Lowe had a couple of years ago, that there was no team with a more bleak future than Miami. And what did they do? They just went to, 3 Eastern Conference Finals. Like,
they managed to pull off the Jimmy Butler trade, yeah.
Didn't those comments about Miami's front office, didn't that come after the Jimmy trade?
No, that was when they were still like with James Johnson and Dion and Whiteside and all those guys.
Fair
and
enough.
Then
so let me lay out the path for this season to be viewed as a success, right? Jimmy is energized. It's like, screwed up last year. Contract year, Jimmy. He's energized. He's available. Bam, aggressive. Slides down to the 4. You start Khalil. I don't know how it works out. Let's just say miraculously there are games there where he plays at the 4, spaces the floor, provides more shooting, etc. Tyler, again, on the roster, pissed off. And even if he doesn't take a huge leap, like there were moments last year where he was damn good and he was a really fine player as a scorer, a regular season scorer that's a complimentary player on this roster. You got Hyman taking a second-year leap. You got Nikola Jovic taking another leap. You've got Terry Rozier healthy and active and rolling and doing the things that he was supposed to do when he was acquiring this team. All of a sudden, Miami, our side of the gate, wins, at a 60% rate or whatever, and is like within the top 4 seeds of the Eastern Conference. Like at that point in time, then Miami will have a much more difficult decision, I think. And at the All-Star break, right around the trade deadline, it's like, do we go all in this year for one last chance? And that's when you have to reassess the roster and the players that you have there, and you can build and make another trade to add another key role player or role players that can complement the existing group on the roster and make a push for the NBA Finals. Maybe it's a star, maybe it's a role player, who knows? But you can make another trade at the All-Star break, and then you win, and you win big, and you win the playoffs, and maybe you somehow get to the NBA Finals, and maybe you win a championship. Like, these things could happen. Like, it's not so far-fetched. That's what I'm just saying. Like, maybe if people think I'm like,
trade are they going to make at the deadline? And I have 2 problems with that. First of all, still 1 first-round pick that you could trade. No second-round picks. Second part is it's reactionary. It feels like there's no plan.
But everything is. Nobody.
No,
if you asked 3 years ago, everybody thought Dame Lillard was going to retire a Portland Trailblazer. Drew Holiday is on his third team in the past few seasons, like Milwaukee and now Boston, and it's like, these things.
But the teams that trade for them are prepared for those deals. My point with Miami is they're never prepared for that star player to come available. They just hope that star player becomes available and forces his way to Miami. They're not prepared with the draft picks that they need, with the cap space that they need, with the assets that they need. They're not prepared for it. They just hope for it. And that's
They
my
were
biggest.
they were
That's my
they were
biggest.
supposed to have
problem
won a
with this.
title over the last 5 seasons. They have not. They were supposed to have won a title at some point in the last 5 seasons that could give them the kind of I don't know, the emotional credit that Heat fans are frustrated with right now. It's like, you know what? We're looking at 5 years and we've done nothing. We've won some games and we just haven't been able to cement it with a championship. Like, you could be much more satisfied looking at what they've done or what they haven't done if they somehow you got a title out of it. And unfortunately, they just haven't been able to get that part of it done. I don't know, man.
I'm excited for this next year. I am. I don't want it to sound like I'm out. Like, contract year, Jimmy. Hopefully a healthy Terry Rozier. I'm really excited to see what the Heat can do with Khalil Ware and Bam Adebayo, which, by the way, is Khalil Ware going to start? Because there's no other full-time centers on the roster unless they just want Bam to stay starting at center. Mm-hmm. Kevin Love's not starting. They re-signed him. Nikola Jovic may or may not be ready to start the season based on this injury. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. So we'll see what happens, man. I don't know. I think we're at the point where I feel like we're talking in circles right now. The one thing is, and I'll just finish with this point, the last 5 years have been awesome. This feels like a last dance. I'm okay with that. And I just hope that the Heat have a plan for what the next 5 years look like. And I'm sure they do. But I understand when the Heat fan base is frustrated when they don't know what the plan is. Because even with the Lakers, when they strike out on Klay Thompson, at least you know that they were in on Klay Thompson. And I guess that's what this DeMar DeRozan thing might be. It's like, well, at least they were trying. They were trying to do something, even if they miss. I don't know. But I get it, man. I understand all points where Donovan Mitchell's re-signing and teams are making trades and the Heat are like, we've officially signed Pelle Larsson. And you're just like, really?
Which I like. I like that move. It's a good move.
To sign your draft pick?
Yeah, we're all in on that. I like the draft. I like the draft that they like the players they got.
I like the draft too. But I can understand why you can understand why the fan base would be frustrated by, like, all these things are happening. The rest of your competition is getting better, and you're emailing press releases about signing your own draft picks, so we already know you had.
I hear you. Yeah, the Drew Smith.
That had to be a joke, right? Like that was just the front office knowing exactly what they were doing.
No,
like that's a new definition of running it back. Like, this guy who we've cut literally 5 times.
They don't. That is
him
not
back on 2A. We can't even give you just some super athletic guy with a 42-inch vertical. Just like sign a guy who just can't play ball. I like Drew Smith fine. I'm happy to have him back, but that was hilarious.
That was at the wrong
pretty
time
tone
for
deaf. That was pretty tone deaf.
Somebody's been like, man, let's just hold off. Like, maybe it's official, but let's not announce it until like July, like right before Summer League. At that point in time, it'll be a lot easier. It really was. Everyone's like, oh, Paul George joins super team in Philadelphia, and they're adding all these super teams. Like, Miami Heat signed Drew Smith to a 2-way contract. It's
Make
like,
it moves.
all right.
Making moves.
That's a tough one. No knock on Drew again, but it's
right again. Look, there's still 3 months to go here in the offseason. Summer League is coming up. DeMar DeRozan, that thing is still out there, even though you and I are a little doubtful that the Heat are going to be able to pull that off, and it would be even worth the hoops that they'd have to jump through to do it. But it ain't over yet. It ain't over yet. So we'll end it there. Tomorrow we'll talk about some of the options, what other free agents are out there. The Heat do have to sign somebody because they have to fill the roster. So they're probably looking at maybe 2 more players that they can sign. What's the latest on Caleb Martin? What's the latest on Haywood Highsmith? We'll have all of that tomorrow and more for you over on Locked On Heat, plus whatever breaking news, whatever rumors are out there. We'll discuss that as well. But for now, thanks for hanging out with us live on YouTube for an hour. Thanks for everybody who left the comments or questions in the comments section. Sorry we couldn't get to more of them. But for now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on your podcast app.